Most of the water that we collect in the Poudre River and use for drinking water comes from snow melt and snowpack in the Poudre River Basin itself. And we'll look at that as we go along on the fly through here, as well as in more detail on the next slide. We also own some water rights in an adjoining basin that would normally flow into a different river and be used elsewhere. But we have rights to transfer some of that water into the Poudre River for our use. This is Lake Agnes, high above Cameron Pass. Actually, it's on the eastern slope. And you can see there's pretty steep slopes around it. And there are a couple of other lakes nearby. There's this lake here and over here. Um, the snowpack around here all melts and comes toward Lake Agnes, and again, would normally flow into a different basin. But because of a project called the Michigan Ditch, we're able to transfer it, and we own rights to this water and are able to transfer this water into the Poudre River. It flows through this Michigan Ditch here. This is a pretty steep slope, and the ditch is cut into the mountain right along that slope. We have a full-time crew in the summer that is up there maintaining all of this infrastructure, making sure that that ditch doesn't break through its banks or anything like that. It's actually 7 miles of ditch that they maintain. And historically, we had one really bad issue right about in this area. There was a landslide that just moves a few inches a year, and it's been doing it probably for hundreds of years. 3 or 4 inches a year it would slide down, then every 3 or 4 years the crew would have to kind of rebuild the ditch in this section. Although a few years back it moved 4 or 5 feet in one year and then several feet the following year, and it was just too much too many resources needed to maintain a ditch that's moving that fast. So what happened was we were able to get an emergency appropriation from council to actually drill back into the mountain through the bedrock behind the landslide and install the Michigan Ditch Tunnel. And you may have heard about that project at the time. What you see here are cabins up on Michigan Ditch, because this is such full-time work to maintain this infrastructure up here. We have a crew that actually lives up there during the summer. They work week-long shifts and are just up there day and night working on maintaining the ditch. And the ditch eventually flows into the Michigan River, which then flows into Joe Wright Reservoir. And Joe Wright Reservoir is owned by the city of Fort Collins. This is where we store the water that we collect through the Michigan Ditch system. And then that water can be released into the Poudre River to supplement our water rights. We also own very, very senior water rights on water in the river itself. When it's released, that water would go through Chambers Lake and then eventually into the Poudre River. And then that water flows down the river. And as you can see, there are miles and miles of river here that we don't have any direct control over. So managing how much water goes in and how much water we take back out, and whether there's any water loss along the way is can be daunting. Although the river commissioner, the state employs a river commissioner to manage the water rights in the river, and pretty much the water that we release we're allowed to take back out at our diversion point, which is here in Gateway Natural Area. This is an old water treatment plant. It was in service from 1910 through about 1986. The buildings for the water treatment plant are still up there at Gateway Natural Area, right at the northeast end of the park area in Gateway Natural Area. This here, you can actually see the water overflowing our small dam. It's a very small dam that just pools a little bit of water behind it so that we can more easily divert that water through our intake structure right here. And then that water comes through a very large pipeline right through the mountain into our pre-sedimentation basin, which is this domed structure right here. And if you visit Gateway Natural Area, you will see that dome structure as you're entering the natural area right here. The pre-sedimentation basin allows us to remove all of the really large material, small rocks, twigs, things like that, before it goes into the pipeline and is sent down to the water treatment facility. I'm going to go back upstream just a bit here, real briefly, to show you Another diversion structure. This one is North Poudre Irrigation Company's diversion structure. And you can see again the water overflowing a very small dam. That dam is just a couple feet high. It serves the purpose of pooling the water high enough behind it just so that it can be diverted into a pipeline. But we own shares in North Poudre Irrigation Company. The reason this infrastructure is important to us because we do actually have a pipeline that draws off of North Poudre's system down farther. And so this water is important to us as well. So the water is diverted under the road into this intake structure and into a pipeline. Some of you may have seen in Michelle Fincham's presentations elsewhere an infrastructure where she shows impact from climate change, and that this was a piece of infrastructure that was filled with mud from a landslide off of this slope after the fires in 2012. That is what you were looking at, is this structure right here. It's between 4 and 10 feet deep here, and about approximately, and it was filled to the brim with mud after that landslide. Took quite a bit of effort to clean that up. There's been discussion about potentially covering it, but because of all of the stakeholders involved and figuring out who's going to pay what for that project, it has not come to fruition yet. So the water is piped from Gateway Natural Area down. Generally, the pipeline follows the canyon down, crisscrosses the river in a few places. Let's zoom out so we can move through this more quickly. And then here, at we're looking at the mouth of the canyon right here. Back up here is where the North Poudre irrigation system daylights into a canal. And then here's another diversion structure. This is where we divert water off of North Poudre Irrigation Company's system and put it into a pipeline called Pleasant Valley Pipeline, which also goes to the water treatment facility. This large basin you see here is another pre-sedimentation basin. Also, again, that is where we can divert the water so that the large material can settle out before we put it into the pipeline, things like pine needles, rocks, things like that. And then it is put into the pipeline and goes to the water treatment facility. And then both the Pleasant Valley and the Poudre pipelines come down toward Fort Collins. The Pleasant Valley pipeline is so named because it comes through this area here, which is known as Pleasant Valley. When we get to Horsetooth Reservoir, so this area here is known as Pleasant Valley. A little fun fact about it is that if you're familiar with green giant vegetables, the landscape you see in the label of green giant vegetables is actually inspired by the scenery in Pleasant Valley here. And eventually all of that water ends up here at the Fort Collins Water Treatment Facility. Across the road from us is the Soldier Canyon Water Treatment Facility. We collaborate quite a bit, but they are actually a separate entity that serves other areas around us. This here is the Fort Collins Water Treatment Facility. Pleasant Valley and Poudre pipelines come in from the north. And then right here is Soldier Canyon Dam with Horsetooth Reservoir, and we draw off of it through this diversion structure right here, and that pipeline comes in here.